Okay, we lose trees, we saw increases in mortality, but if we plant trees, do we see the opposite? Because if you could see things going in both directions, it would really increase the evidence that trees are good for you. Right? You've got tree planting data from Friends of Trees, 50,000 trees planted in yards, and, well, most of the street trees, I think about 87% of street trees. So then I had to go get some health data, so I contacted Oregon Health Authority, and they gave me access to census tract level mortality data. So a census tract is a unit used by the census. It's probably about 4,500 people. It's roughly the size of a named neighborhood. So we can just, for the purposes of this discussion, think of it as neighborhood level mortality. And we looked at two tree planting measures. One, very simple, how many trees have been planted in a neighborhood in the last 15 years? Just total trees. But then we also looked at the number of trees in 3 age bands. That's 1 to 5 years after planting, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15. So we split those trees up into 3 age bands. Why? Well, because before we collect any data, we would think that as trees age and grow, they would have a bigger impact on health. Well, why is that? So, for example, as a tree gets bigger, its leaf area goes up, so its capacity to absorb air pollution. Then think about stress reduction, the sort of psychologically restorative effect of trees. If you're sitting down under a sort of 100-year-old elm tree with a big spreading crown, big trees are likely to have a bigger impact on health. So let's just jump straight to the result. It was a pretty simple statistical model here. We just had 5 variables in the model. So this table, very simple, don't worry. It just shows how 5 variables were associated with non-accidental mortality. So what do we find? Well, we found that in wealthier neighborhoods, there was less mortality. Next, we find that in neighborhoods where there was the average age was higher, we saw increases in mortality. And then we found education, better educated neighborhoods, low mortality. Again, entirely as you would expect. We didn't find an impact of race. A couple of reasons why that might be. One, we already had income and education in the model, so to some degree that accounts for that. And then Portland just doesn't actually have a huge amount of racial variation. So, the final thing here, let's get to the drum roll. We looked at tree planting in the last 15 years. What about neighborhoods that have more trees in the last 15 years? Well, we saw it's very significantly decreased mortality. Okay, but how about the size, the magnitude of that? So, on average, Friends of Trees planted about 1,638 trees annually. And we found that those 1,638 trees was associated with 15.6 fewer deaths a year. That's really not a trivial number in a city of 600,000. Roughly 100 trees averted 1 death, which is, I mean, that's amazing, really. So, 1 to 5 years after planting, 1,638 trees were associated with 11.6 fewer deaths. Okay, now let's wait another 5 years. 6 to 10 years after planting, 1,638 trees were associated with 19.7 fewer deaths. Interesting. Let's go another 5 years, 1,638 trees that were 11 to 15 years old were associated with 23.1 fewer deaths. So as you would expect, as these trees aged and grow, the association between trees and reduced mortality went up. So a few things really to take up from this graph. This is important, and we're also going to start to talk about what it means from a perspective of EAB. So first, the simple thing, the association between trees and reduced mortality gets bigger as trees age and grow. That means that retaining mature trees is at least, if not more important than planted trees. And that's an important message. That means in the context of EAB, it's really best to avoid losing those mature trees, particularly in concentrated areas that are around people. So in that case, pesticide treatment may yield some non-trivial health benefits. So I think that's the take-home message there. So now, as well as looking at non-accidental death, we were interested, hey, how does this study compare to the EAB study? Because I conceived of this as kind of as a study to go with the EAB study. So we chose, let's look at specifically cardiovascular death. And this table, the yellow line there, we found, yes, planting trees was associated, highly significantly associated with reduced cardiovascular disease. This is interesting. We looked at lower respiratory mortality, And in this case, at the 5% level, it wasn't significant, it just was. At the 10%, it's kind of marginal, so we'll set that aside. I think that's mostly just because low respiratory mortality is a little less common than cardiovascular mortality, so the sort of statistical power of the analysis, the capacity to find that relationship is a bit lower. So then, a really important one is what about accidental death? Again, we don't want to see a relationship there, and we did not find one. So to summarize, in the EAB paper, we found that loss of trees was associated with increases in cardiovascular disease. And in the tree planting paper using Friends of Trees data, we found tree planting was associated with lower mortality. And these are two completely different studies. You know, they're both in different areas, different time. Really, the methodology was quite different. And in both, you found consistent results, which I think is really cool. And in both cases, tree planting was never associated with increases in accidental mortality. So I think that's an important take-home message. Now, if you plant 140 trees in Portland, what our model says is that will be associated with 1.33 fewer deaths. Except in strange circumstances, the benefits of tree planting is always going to exceed the cost. And the magnitude of these benefits far exceed the cost of planting and maintenance. So that's another important take-home message. And because big trees are associated with bigger health benefits, it means that for EAB, I think you would have two messages. Try and retain those mature trees, particularly if they're around people. When you do remove trees, aggressively planting. I think that hopefully some of the science I've showed you here supports both of those policy prescriptions and that they will be highly cost effective.